I want to welcome our second panel and do some quick introductions before they get started. Beginning on my left is Dr. William Danforth. He is currently the chairman of the board of directors of the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center. He also serves as Chancellor Emeritus of Washington University and chairs the Coalition of Plant and Life Sciences. He became Washington University's 13th chancellor in 1971 and served until his retirement in 1995. Dr. Danforth received his BA from Princeton University, his MD from Harvard Medical School in 1951, and is a native of St. Louis, Missouri. Next, Mr. Gerald Steiner is Monsanto's Executive Vice President of Sustainability and Corporate Affairs. He leads the company's global government and public and industry affairs teams across 70 countries where Monsanto does business. He is also co-founder and board member of the Global Harvest Initiative, a public-private initiative whose mission is to sustainably double agricultural production by 2050. He received a BS degree in agricultural economics from the University of Wisconsin and an MBA from Washington University. Next, Dr. Hans Herren. He was appointed Millennium Institute's president in May of 2005. Previously, he was Director General of the International Center for Physiology and Ecology in Nairobi, Kenya. That would be interesting. Dr. Herren was a recipient of the 1995 World Food Prize, the highest award given to an individual for advancing human development by improving the quality, quantity, and availability of food in the world. Dr. Herren earned his PhD at the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland. Next, Ms. Evelyn Nasuna. Did I say that correctly? Welcome. Ms. Nasuna is the Uganda Country Director for Lutheran World Relief, an organization that works with local implementing partners around the world to seek lasting solutions to rural poverty. She manages the LWR's Uganda portfolio of agriculture, health, and livelihood development work. Previously, she worked for Catholic Relief Services and Law and Advocacy for Women in Uganda. She's a native of Uganda, holds a Bachelor of Law from the University in Tanzania and a master's degree from Georgetown University Law in Washington. And finally, Ms. Jennifer Smith Nazari. Did I say that correctly? Nazara. She's been country representative in Rwanda since August 2008. Joined Catholic Relief Services in 1993. She has worked in Morocco, Haiti, and Cameroon, holds a bachelor's degree from Mount Holyoke College, a master's degree from Johns Hopkins School of International Studies, and was also a Peace Corps volunteer in Cameroon. Welcome to all of you. We're really looking forward to this second panel, and we will recognize Dr. Danforth to kick this off. Welcome, Dr. Danforth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Carnahan, Chairman Payne, Ranking Members Rohrbach and Smith. I appreciate this opportunity to share my vision with you. We started our Plant Science Center in St. Louis because we saw a historic opportunity to further important basic human rights, enough nutrition to sustain life and health, and a livable environment for one's family. We saw that these goals could be pursued in partnership with national and international organizations. And we believed and do believe that the stars are aligned for success for several reasons. One, thanks to decades of federal investment, we have the scientific biologic tools. Second, we have two strong federal programs, the Agricultural and Food Research Initiative, AFRI, it's part of the new congressionally mandated National Institute for Food and Agriculture in the USDA. And second, the Agency for International Development works effectively with international organizations to bring them some of the boons of modern science to people who need it most. Thus, in my view, we have the tools, and we also have problems that need solutions. We've heard earlier, 1 billion people will go to bed hungry tonight. On an average, every 6 seconds, a child somewhere will die of causes related to malnutrition. So we feel a sense of urgency. Moreover, the population of the world is growing, as are the demands on farmers for greater production per acre with less input of water and fertilizers. We think that biotechnology is part of the solution. As I say to our St. Louis friends, we, with our skills, are at the right place at the right time. It's up to us to make the most of our opportunities to do something wonderful. And I appreciate your interest here, for nothing so great can happen without the support and help of this federal government. I'll tell you a bit about our Plant Science Center as just one example of what can take place. We're not-for-profit, dedicated to using plant science for human betterment. More specifically, we want to help feed the hungry and promote better human nutrition and to preserve and enhance the environment. To feed the world with its expanding population and greater per capita consumption of food without ruining the environment. That will require that by 2050, farmers will have to double the production per acre with less use of water and fertilizer. The traditional method of adding more acreage won't work. That just land doesn't exist. Our work with cassava will provide you with specifics. Cassava is a root crop with limited market or money-making potential in the development world, but is the third largest source of calories in the developing world. 700 million people rely on cassava as a major source of food. It offers a lot, rich in calories, grows in poor soils, withstands drought, and food. It's a food security crop. Families can preserve the roots in the ground and dig them up when they're hungry. But cassava has problems. Crops can be devastated by virus diseases. While there are lots of calories, it lacks vitamins, minerals, and proteins. Children are especially subject to protein deficiency and vitamin A deficiency, two conditions that can lead to disability and early death. We have two separate projects. Our longest one is to increase the resistance to cassava mosaic virus, and more recently the devastating brown streak virus that destroys crops. So far, the results of field tests in Uganda look good. More recently, thanks to the Gates Foundation, we've been making cassava more nutritious. To date, we and our partners have quadrupled the levels of protein and iron and increased the amount of vitamin A by 30-fold. But doing science is only part of our effort. With the funding of the Gates Foundation, we've created a new biosafety research source network. The goal is to assure research projects that are part of that foundation's Great Challenge Global Health Initiative deal properly with biosafety, regulatory issues, and the technologies are so socially and culturally appropriate. We work with African scientists to train young people to be scientists. Finally, I would say that federal support for these timely efforts is very important, and to make the most of today's opportunities. And I particularly note the importance of the Department of Agriculture with its new Agriculture and Food Research Initiative, and the department and the Agency for International Development. I have with me a article from the New York Times that's quite interesting, and I'd like to submit it, if I may, as part of the record.
Without objection. Thank you, Dr. Danforth, and we'll next go to Mr. Steiner.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chairman Carnahan and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me today to testify on an exciting new initiative, Feed the Future, and I'm going to present a summary of my written testimony. For us, Feed the Future is exciting because it recognizes the power of millions of farmers to meet the world's growing demand for food and fiber and fight poverty at the same time. Farming is diverse, and it's local, and there is no single way to accomplish the goal described. There is no silver bullet that if you do just one thing, we can meet this problem and fix it. I find in my travels around the world that farmers are often underestimated. And we really believe that farmers should have more and better choices so that they can select what they see as best. Now, I grew up on a small Wisconsin dairy farm, and I really loved watching things grow. And, Chairman, I stacked many loads of hay myself, and I understand the importance of stacking the foundation very firmly. Today, I love working for Monsanto. We're a company that develops some of the tools that helps farmers produce more on every acre, do it with less risk, and with a smaller environmental footprint. As a company, we're wholly focused on agriculture. It's our only business. That gives us great opportunity, and it also gives us great responsibility. And we are committed to improving agriculture's ability to meet the demands that are placed on it by the growing population that's been talked about here and the environmental challenges. This is an immense challenge, and no one can achieve it by themselves. We actively partner with other people, including on-the-ground NGOs. Together, we believe we can build systems that begin with access to more choices in tools like improved seeds, fertilizer, extension, and have to end with a functioning market and a road to get the commerce there. In other words, these are exactly the type of systems that are envisioned in Feed the Future. For Monsanto, doing our part means investing in cutting-edge innovation to develop better seeds. Seeds that farmers can see for themselves and choose when they see that they make sense. Now, this private sector investment requires predictable science-based regulatory systems and reasonable laws to protect these kinds of new inventions. We have 400 people who live and work in Africa, and we're proud that our local business in a country like Malawi was able to contribute to the improvements in food security that they've made over the last 5 years. And we believe that these situations ultimately are addressed by having a strong local business sector, and that's crucial to accomplishing the mission. And sometimes a humanitarian action is also needed to get it started. We are engaged in a variety of public and private partnerships around the world, both in the market development side as well as accessing better seeds. One of the most significant on the Accessing Better Seeds is a 2-year-old program called the Water Efficient Maize for Africa, or WEMA. Its goal is to increase the drought tolerance of white maize in Africa, where it is the key staple crop. Now, to maximize the performance and deliver the best locally adapted drought-tolerant seed for these farmers, we have donated access to our best locally adapted hybrid germplasm, new breeding tools that we've developed for our commercial business, and biotechnology-based genes that we think are going to help in drought. Nothing is held back in meeting this challenge. We believe WEMA will result in seeds that perform just as well in good conditions, but achieve 20 to 35% more yield when we have moderate droughts. And the yield protection provided by these seeds then makes it less risky for farmers to invest in fertilizer, meaning more farmers will use it, and the entire local community will benefit from the increased production and increased consistency. The design around WEMA follows the principles that are laid out in Feed the Future. It's led by a local organization in Africa, the African Agricultural Technology Foundation based in Kenya. It directly engages the 5 partner countries and their ag research systems. CIMMYT, which is the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center and home of the late Dr. Norman Borlaug. And while these scientists are out there working in the field developing this product, they're also developing their capacity. In fact, there's a brand new team of 60 scientists that are out there today that are up and operating. This new kind of unprecedented partnership makes excellent and efficient use of public resources, and I believe it is part of the future. The beauty, in closing, the beauty of helping with better seeds, whether they're conventional hybrids or biotech, is that they can be used by and benefit every farmer, from the woman in Burkina Faso farming an acre with a hoe to the Iowa farm family using GPS-guided tractors on thousands of acres. The promise of an improved seed is portable, it's scale-neutral, and it's built-in. Our focus is on what works in the field. Feed the Future contains the seeds for real progress also in helping them meet some of these most pressing and greatest needs and greatest opportunities, and we stand ready as one of many partners to help it grow. Thank you.
Dr. Herren.
Chairman Carnahan, members of the committee, pleasure to be here today, and thanks for the invitation. The future guide, I think, is a very forward-looking document, and again, which demonstrates a strong will to move forward in terms of the global food security. I would have called this rather nourish the future rather than defeat the future, because I think we have to think also of nutrition security and not only food security in the future. The 5 principles by which this initiative will be implemented look interesting and certainly, but also need to be looked at a bit more closely. In particular, the issue of these country-owned plans, and I think in particular the issue of how are the countries actually able to do the planning and come forward and defend their own ideas later on. And I think that has been shown in the past to be a problem, and I think also in the future, unless some steps are being taken to help countries with developing those plans, in particular with capacity building, to get in that direction, so they can do make their own decisions and come forward with plans which are acceptable. The policy approach, which considers sustainable agriculture and small-scale farmer, again, that's good, which is lined out. But I think it falls short on some key issues which are the center of a new paradigm for sustainable agriculture. What has been outlined as the way forward, again, is more of the same, more seeds and fertilizer, and there's very little talk about actually looking at the system, because the problems we have in agriculture are systemic problems in agriculture and beyond agriculture, which I think have to be addressed. And they cannot be solved with quick fixes, as in the past we have done already. And as the co-chair of the International Assessment of Agricultural Science and Technology for Development, these are the book here, 2,000 pages total, which have been written by 400 people, is not even mentioned in the report. And here we have basically analyzed the last 50 years of agricultural knowledge, science, and technology, and looked 50 years forward. It is quite interesting that even though there are summary for decision makers which are very small, some 20 pages to read, have not found their ways into the initiative, which, by the way, was funded by the United States by $250,000, had 3 government members writing on it. 56 U.S. authors were also part of this exercise. So it is a bit unfortunate that all the wisdom which has been accumulated there, in particular looking at sustainable agriculture issues, have not been taken into account. We also make a point that the multifunctionality of agriculture is very important, and we have to look at agriculture in the environment where it's done, and it is very site-specific, so one size doesn't fit all at all. And I think that's something, when we look at science and technology, how this could be helping, we have to be very careful that this is done actually and developed locally rather than just in one place and transferred to another. One issue also which doesn't appear and which relates to actually the issue of nutrition security is the issue of diversity. And again, here I think the report doesn't address the issue of more diversified food plants which need to be grown and worked and developed. And I think that's something which cannot be done simply, and again, has to be done at the country level by the people, and because they're very dependent on the different environments. And I think that we know what works. There are many technologies developed already in Africa, managed to push-pull, and you can look it up, or biocontrol, which has saved the cassava crop. With $20 million, we saved 200 million people's livelihood and 20 million lives. I've done this myself, so I know what's going on and how we can change things in Africa. And it cannot be done with quick fixes. Again, I think we have to think about the system and see how we can work with the system rather than with just a silver bullet approach. It's a matter of price also, to make sure that some of the solutions, I think, which can be implemented right now are ready. They could go with much less cost and time delay than to develop new varieties, when actually we know that what exists already can quadruple, minimum, or maybe more, in a very sustainable way the production, or agriculture production in Africa, and the farm productivity rather than just more yield of a specific crop. So I think that we do have solutions. Well, and make sure that they get implemented to this program rather than to look again for silver bullets. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Herren. Now I'd like to recognize Ms. Nasuna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the respective subcommittees for this opportunity to speak about Lutheran World Relief's work with small-scale farmers in Uganda, as well as my initial thoughts on the impact that Feed the Future can have on that work. Some of you are probably familiar with LWR, but many of you suspect are not. So let me begin by telling you a bit about us. LWR is a relief and development organization supported by U.S. Lutherans, church bodies, private foundations, and a small number of government grants. We are also supported by some remarkable U.S. farmers who work with the Food Resource Bank to use their farms to raise funds to support farmers in developing countries. In Uganda and around the world, LWR works through local NGOs and grassroots organizations to seek lasting solutions to rural poverty. Guided by a philosophy and framework of accompaniment, we seek to empower local communities by emphasizing shared values and jointly developed objectives. I have personally been blessed to work for LWR in Uganda since 2004. One of the organizations I've had the privilege to work with in Uganda is LWR partner Gumutindo Coffee Cooperative Enterprise. A few years ago, the story of Gumutindo could easily have been a story of failure. In 2006, Gumutindo recorded a loss of $2,000 US. Coffee bean quality was low, production was weak, and farmer members lacked technical knowledge to produce healthy crops. LWR worked with the organization to put in place better financial systems and provided resources to help train the farmers. Now Gumutindo has become a booming cooperative. Its coffee beans are high quality, its production is efficient, membership has grown to 10,000 farmers, and in 2008, Gumutindo made a profit of $250,000 US. The very banks that refused to work with the cooperative in 2006 are now calling Gumutindo and offering loans. But Gumutindo's real success is not in numbers, it's in its members, like Mrs. Katsfa Bisaso. Mrs. Bisaso is a widow and a coffee farmer who once struggled to produce enough income from her coffee trees to feed her family. As a result of her own hard work and training from Gumutindo, Mrs. Bisaso has seen a remarkable transformation in her farming enterprise. She says her trees look better and she's commanding a higher price for her crop. But she's especially excited by her increased yield, which is more than 30% larger than last season. With her new income, Mrs. Bisaso is investing in a diverse diet for her family by purchasing a cow and 2 goats. She's also paying school fees for her granddaughter and saving to buy a pulping machine that will help further increase the value of her coffee beans. In Wakiso district, LWR works with a Ugandan NGO and a certified microfinance institution called Voluntary Action for Development to provide access to credit, training, and technology for 10 cooperatives of maize, bean, and mushroom farmers. Mrs. Namuli Kate is one of the farmers. A subsistence farmer for the last 10 years, Mrs. Kate was struggling to provide food and education for her 3 children. With the help of VAD, she recently decided to focus on growing produce, provide income as well as food for her family. After being trained in new farming techniques, bookkeeping, and marketing, Mrs. Kate was able to take out a small loan to cultivate 2 acres of improved maize. After selling her crop to a local school, she was able to pay off part of her loan, send her children to school, and invest in a local poultry project. With more than 1 billion suffering from hunger, the world can learn much from the experiences of Mrs. Bisaso, Mrs. Kate, Gumutindo, and VAD. Key lessons include the need to focus on small producers, empower women, strengthen organizations, and consult with the affected communities. One of the things I detailed in connection with the story of Mrs. Kate is that much of the food accessible in rural Africa is produced by farmers just like her. I've seen American farms, so I know that her 2-acre maize patch might not seem much to you, but you cannot overlook her or her maize patch if you want to help Uganda. What she does is the mainstay of our economy and the primary source of our food. Work with small-scale producers to increase yield and create value-added products, two important components of the Feed the Future, is the way forward for Uganda. Feed the Future has also identified gender as one of its cross-cutting priorities, and I agree strongly with this strategy. Although women, like the two I've told you about, do most of the farming in Africa, they face significant disadvantages compared to men. Challenges include access to land ownership, education, and credit. So I look forward to seeing increased efforts to make agriculture inputs and extension services more accessible to women. At the same time, I hope Feed the Future will be careful not to overlook the husbands, fathers, and brothers of these women. Before starting a new project to help women, it's also important to consult with the men to find out what it will take to make them supportive of the project. When men are included in the process and see that what the women are doing is helpful to their communities, they will support progress instead of opposing it. Another big challenge for Feed the Future will be to scale up work that is already proving successful. LWR, for example, has helped tens of thousands of Ugandan farmers, but there are more than 30 million people in our country, the majority of which derive all or part of their livelihood from agriculture. And helping rural communities in a developing country is challenging. Each farm is different, and each community is distinct. The only thing you can count on is the fact that the travel to reach them will be difficult. Supporting organized groups of farmers is the key to scaling up successfully. Feed the Future is a new initiative, and so the impulse may be to start new groups and organizations, but I encourage you to focus on the groups that are already there. They may be poorly governed and have little bookkeeping or business knowledge, but as demonstrated by our work with Gumutindo, there is great potential to turn these groups into good development partners with built-in community support who can support technical education, collective purchasing arrangements, collective credit arrangements, savings opportunities for thousands of farmers at a time. But the most important lesson I can offer you from my work in Uganda is that Feed the Future must find a way to ensure that national governments in charge of developing country plans consult with the intended beneficiaries and their local civil society organizations. In Africa, this means small farmers with limited resources and little time to spare. Civil society organizations are equally stretched, and with many staff members holding two jobs just to make ends meet. But these people and organizations must be involved if country investment plans are to be effective, accepted, and incorporated broadly. Governments must have the financial support and the incentive to consult with farmers. In most cases, they cannot do this by email or even by phone. Government officials must meet in person with small farmers and civil society groups and provide adequate time for meaningful consultation. Very literally, this means government officials making trips or supporting the travel of small farmers and civil society groups to hold consultation. Something as simple as providing translation is easily overlooked and also critical to consultation success. But this calls for financial support. I trust these efforts will be made, but at the end of the day, Feed the Future must ensure that national governments fulfill their consultation requirements by refusing to push forward country plans that do not include the input of affected communities and local civil society. My final thought on Feed the Future is simply that you should give this program the time and the support it needs to succeed, whilst you remain vigilant in your roles as overseers. In the agriculture sector, results are rarely needed, and if they are, you may want to question them. Mrs. and Mrs. K did not improve their livelihoods overnight, and to be honest, they still face challenges. But they have more stable access to food than ever, and their diets and those of their families continue to improve. This important progress came as a result of their own hard work and a little support from people in the United States. Your continued support for Feed the Future will ensure that many more lives are impacted. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to recognize Ms. Nazaire.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank Chairman Payne, Chairman Carnahan, Ranking Member Smith, and Ranking Member Rohrabacher for calling this important hearing on Feed the Future program. To the two chairmen, I would like to submit my official statement for the record, and I will be summarizing my statement for you here. I am Jennifer Smith Nazaire, Catholic Relief Services Country Representative for Rwanda. CRS has had a presence in Rwanda since 1960, and we have worked since then in poor communities throughout the country and many other countries on agricultural production, food security, and nutrition initiatives. CRS has maintained steadfast relationships with these communities and local partner organizations throughout the changes in development approaches over more than 4 decades. During the 20 years of neglect of agriculture by major development donors, CRS used our limited private resources to continue work with farmers and rural communities because we recognize the crucial role that agriculture plays in rural economic development and its direct link to reducing poverty and hunger. CRS would like to emphasize that the purpose of Feed the Future should be to build food security for the poorest people in the poorest countries, and not just to increase food production through agribusiness or other large-scale schemes. Governments must play a national leadership role, but do not always have the orientation and capacity to reach the poorest farmers in a comprehensive and effective way. To develop effective and representative responses, governments need to engage with local civil society and international NGOs about the best approaches for solving problems of food security. CRS has a long, proud history of partnering with the government of Rwanda and civil society organizations in agriculture, food security, and nutrition programming. Such programs have evolved significantly over 50 years, from nationwide school feeding activities to complex and comprehensive nutrition and livelihood projects reaching Rwanda's most vulnerable populations. Today's programming also includes value chain marketing initiatives involving strategic food commodities such as cassava, orange flesh sweet potato, and coffee, to name a few. Local operational NGOs are advancing food security development efforts in significant ways in all Feed the Future target countries. National investment strategies do not always reflect this. Local NGOs have developed programs and activities over many years that advance food security to fill a void caused by lack of attention by national governments. On December 7th and 8th, 2009, I was one of a number of NGO representatives invited to a 2-day country-led consultation process for Feed the Future in Kigali, hosted by the government of Rwanda. The meeting was part of the signing of a compact between the government of Rwanda and the African Union's Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, CAADP. As you know, Rwanda was the first Feed the Future target country. There was minimal involvement of civil society and international NGOs in the meeting discussions. It was evident that the government of Rwanda and donors do recognize that we in the international NGO community are filling an important gap until necessary capacity has been built in government and civil society, but there were no specifics on how we, or even our local civil society partners, would be involved in the government's plan for agricultural transformation to improve food security. As I come to the end of my testimony, on behalf of CRS, I would like to offer 4 recommendations. First, the measure of success for Feed the Future should be how families grow more food, earn more income, and are better able to provide a healthy diet for themselves and their children. 2, we need to ensure that national investment strategies have mechanisms within their budgets for funding civil society organizations to further the goals of Feed the Future. 3, we would like to see governments formalize mechanisms for citizen participation. Establishing participatory budgeting or ombudsman's offices to address citizen complaints can both empower citizens and provide governments with greater understanding of societal problems. These and other mechanisms for ensuring participation in country strategy development can also serve as a foundation for greater transparency and accountability. 4th and lastly, U.S. government representatives and Feed the Future target countries need to arrange regular meetings with civil society, including international NGOs, local NGO partners, faith-based groups, and other pertinent members. To both chairman and ranking members, thank you for this opportunity to present testimony before the subcommittees. Feed the Future is an exciting departure from the past, as it seeks to address the complexities of global hunger through a comprehensive approach that brings all stakeholders into the process. It is our conviction that civil society plays a key role in that process. I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank all the panel. And we will begin with a round of questions here, and I will kick this off and with the first 5 minutes. And really wanted to start with Dr. Danforth. And you had cited some great examples of the cassava projects in terms of nutrition and resistance to disease that are impressive. Can lessons learned from that program be applied to other crops in Africa? And if so, could you talk about that?
Yes, we have spent most of our efforts on cassava as an African crop. We also work with other African crops such as sorghum and chickpeas and other things, but cassava's gotten most of our attention. And there are, what we think is that the scientific technologies that we use can be applied to other plants. Other plants are not cassava, they have different problems. There is for example, we have been working on the cassava mosaic virus for many years, more than a decade. Work's gone very slowly and it's taken a long time. We're finally in field testing and it looks as if we have something very important. When the new virus came along, because we were used to working with cassava and doing this, it took us, instead of about a dozen years, it took us 3 years to get something into the field. So that these technologies can be used. You just can't take something from one plant and necessarily transplant it into another. But it can be done if you know how to do it.
Thank you, Dr. Danforth. And then for others on the panel, perhaps Mr. Steiner and Dr. Herren, Nobel Prize winner Dr. Norman Borlaug strongly supported the use of both conventional and modern biotechnology to develop crops needed for sustainability and for our growing population needs. I guess I wanted to get your comments on really trying to focus some of these debates that have gone on sound science versus maybe philosophical arguments in terms of meeting these challenges and how we can really be sure we're getting the best science at the table during these efforts.
Chairman Carnahan, I would start, from the perspective of the farmer. The farmer can only plant one seed in that spot in the field, and the farmer wants something that is going to work and is going to stand up to the challenges that nature is going to bring forward. To the extent that we can solve these problems in a more simple manner with breeding, it is fantastic. We know there are certain things that is very, very difficult to do, such as getting plants to protect themselves against viruses of the kind Dr. Danforth talked about. Many we do with breeding, or protect, for example, against insects. And it's very fortunate that we've been able to use the Bt proteins, the same protein that organic gardeners use to control many pests and get plants that can protect themselves. So I think we look at this from the farmer's perspective. They just want something that works and works really reliably here. And I believe we're going to have to use the best of both to really get a solution that is going to fit in many different places, and that solution will be unique.
Dr. Herren.
Yeah, I think we need to really look what has worked in the past, number one. I think there are biological control methods against pathogens and insects, for example, which work very well. I think have to be dig up again and implemented. There's a lot to do there, which doesn't cost the farmer anything, and which actually takes care of the system. Now, any seed, as good as it may be, won't grow on this table here. And the problem actually in Africa is that we have a huge yield gap. The yield gap between the varieties which exist and what they could be performing are at least fourfold, if not more. Now, where is the problem? The problem is therefore not in the seed. The problem is in the soil fertility and water retention. So we have to put the tractor in front of the cart and not behind. And I think that we have to really think about first issues are soil fertility, how to improve it, and actually make agriculture also part of the climate change solution, not the problem. Right now, we are losing all our organic matter. So let's put it back into the soil, have soil which are really fertile and where presently available seeds can produce enough food to feed Africa and the rest of the world beyond 2050. So I think we have to really start to think about where are the problems and solve the problems rather than to look at we have a solution here, where can we use it?
Thank you. My time is up, and I will recognize Mr. Smith for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your testimony and for your leadership. Let me just ask a couple of questions, Jennifer and Nazir, you and I quoted from some of your testimony during the previous panel. Several of my questions went to providing these two subcommittees from the two ambassadors and from their office very detailed accounts as to how the 20 countries were picked, the criteria. I know the 4 criteria, but when you really get down into the weeds, what really was done to ascertain that this country, that country, and this is what we're going to do and how much we're going to spend. We need that kind of oversight and information, but I especially want to know, but I also want to know how the civil society and the international non-government organizations have been integrated, and I will, I'm sure we'll get that information. Hopefully we get it in a timely fashion, but there are several countries that Ambassador Gorbalink had ticked off, and he did all 20 countries quite well, I thought, as being in phase 2, Ghana, Mali, Rwanda, Senegal, Tanzania, Uganda. He mentioned Haiti, although that says 1 on my list, but I guess it's in 2 now, and Bangladesh. And I'm wondering, these are now no longer on the, they're close to the launch stage. What you've been seeing in the field with regards to inclusion of faith-based international NGOs, civil society, and the private sector. I know, and we learned bitter lessons from PEPFAR and from the Global Fund, and many, because of the CCNs and the way they operated, many faith-based and NGOs that were indigenous to that country were left out, and countries where there had been a history of corruption and perhaps an animosity towards the church because it was the voice for human rights, and therefore what government official likes to be called on the carpet, they were excluded from the CCNs. And I and others, but I have pushed this very hard that faith-based is the key, in my opinion, faith-based NGOs, to Africa health. And I would think that given the long history you've had in Rwanda, for example, 50 years, since 1960, you need to be included and in a robust way. So I'm very concerned, and you mentioned that as of that meeting, there was very little contact. Where is it now? Have they reached out to try to bring in Catholic Relief Services or Lutheran or any of the groups that could provide tremendous information and insights and have a whole network that they can then work with on the ground? Transparency.
Thank you for your question. Yes, as I testified, I was invited, and other international NGOs and local civil society were invited to this big meeting in November to launch the Feed the Future initiative in Rwanda. We were very happy to be invited. As I said in my testimony, the discussions were not very inclusive, I would say, of civil society. I would not say that that's the fault of the U.S. government necessarily. I think there are many reasons for that. Perhaps there's a certain environment in Rwanda, and I can only speak for Rwanda. I don't know what the situation was in other countries. In terms of inclusion of civil society, both international NGOs and local civil society, we feel very happy that we have been included in the consultations of the design of this program, and I want to make that very clear. We have collaborated very, very effectively, I think, and have been invited to participate in the design of this initiative. There's that phase, and then there's the implementation phase, which you're asking about. And I think it's a slow process, implementation, and there are many phases, and we may not be aware of all the phases and what's going on. What I can say is that there have been limited meetings since then, since November, that have involved civil society, both international and local civil society. So I'm a bit concerned about that. I think also there's the nature of discussion and participation. When those meetings with civil society are called, are they basically to look at plans that the national government and the donors have put together, and then we are just being asked to check and say, yes, that looks good, or no, this does not? Or have we been active members in putting together those plans? And I think that's what I'm most concerned about. So yes, 2 weeks ago we were invited to a meeting at USAID in Kigali. We participated. We were the only international NGO that was invited, as far as I know. I don't think local civil society was invited.
Missed opportunity. I would hope that the administration would take your advice and the advice of others under consideration. Unless you want to create a sidebar type of program that will be inferior to what could be done overnight, why not take, and we did it with PEPFAR, which makes me, and that was under the Bush administration, and my hope is that we do not replicate that error here. And secondly, very quick to Mr. Steiner, we know that Europe really does have a lot of heartburn over GMOs, and obviously a lot of the money coming into Africa and the target countries, I'm sure, will be coming in, interfacing and working synergistically with European money, or G8 money and even G20 money. So my question is, given their hostility towards GMOs, what kind of balance can be worked out? I happen to be for them. I think it's a way of ensuring the greatest possible feeding of the world, within some guidelines. But how does that work with the country-led plans when you have a competing interest in terms of what kind of seeds go into the ground?
In a meeting that I was in a number of years ago, the expression was, when the elephants dance, the grass gets trampled. And that was what they had said. What I am heartened in what I am seeing is that more and more African countries are starting the process which will enable them to look at these technologies for themselves and be able to make the decision for themselves. A very good example of that is Burkina Faso, which over the last 6 years has been looking at insect-protected cotton, the same insect-protected cotton that is grown in this country and China and India and a whole number of other countries around the world. And they have moved forward, and a third of the cotton crop was produced with the help of that technology, reducing the number of sprays from 6 to 2. So I think the power of example will move this debate, but it will be choppy given those factors.
Appreciate it. See, my time's out. Thank you.
Thank you. And next one to recognize Chairman Payne for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I really applaud this initiative and how the world has come in to support it, with 25,000 people dying every day due to hunger-related causes, and 265 million people, nearly 1/3 of the continent's entire population, suffering from hunger. I do know that we really can't keep spending a whole lot of money that we don't have, but I think that our children and our grandchildren might forgive us for this $3 billion that we're talking about over the next 3 years, and maybe it will reduce some of the 25,000 people who die every day from malnutrition and its related diseases. You might want to divide the number into the cost. You might find it's really not that much. And I guess the question is, how much is a human life worth? And I don't know whether it's, in the eyes of some, where the life is. However, that's a debate for another day. In Rwanda, you say that you have not been that involved and so forth. They invited you in and went out and all that. But let me ask the question: How is food production in Rwanda better this year overall than it was last year, or last year better than the previous year? Is there a success? I might just ask you, since you're there.
Yes, Chairman Payne, I'm not an agriculturalist, so I can't give you any statistics exactly, but I understand that agricultural production is definitely improving in Rwanda. The government of Rwanda has made a commitment to agriculture. They know the great majority of the population depends on agriculture. They have put their money forth, and their investment plan includes their own monies in addition to monies that they're receiving from development partners or hoping to receive. So yes, I think it is a success story so far in Rwanda.
And there are a number of countries that are doing much more poorly, to say the least, and it may be that the expertise that you have, the fact that you've been there so long, that may have had something to do with the fact that the government has kind of pulled itself together and are doing better. And so I think it's not really a rejection of your group, but it might be that there could be next door in Burundi, where I don't hear very good stories happening, that you may put your resources there and it might be better for them. Let me just ask Mr. Steiner, there was the discussion about modified GMOs, and if you could go back, sort of, a lot of times we say in retrospect that we go back and start all over again. Of course, you represent the company, so I want you to keep your job. However, do you feel that GMOs, the concept was introduced properly, that they, was it something that you knew, your company knew, other, scientists knew, and you said, well, this is good, and therefore, you got to take, how can you reject this? I mean, look at how good it is when you're dealing with people who may have a traditional way that they went about. I even read some articles where even in the United States, where the old farmer, I don't know how old Mr. Carnahan is when he was doing that hay on the wagon, but some of the newer farmers, whether there was a thorough explanation about what this thing is,
Well, I think that all of us, if we look backward and say there's nothing we've learned, we probably aren't looking very hard. The first thing I would say is that from a standpoint of farmers everywhere around the world, when they have had the opportunity to choose, have very quickly seen the benefits of these products, whether it be fewer pesticides, less tillage, reduced costs, increased yields right there. And that's been true very universally. We, I believe, got caught up in being so excited about this technology in the first couple of products. One of those I mentioned a minute ago was insect-protected cotton that Burkina Faso just took in place right here. And we thought that how could someone, including someone who cares deeply about the environment, not want to see fewer pesticides being applied to a cotton field? How can anyone fight that? And we really thought we would see a lot more embracing from those organizations, and I think we were blinded by our own enthusiasm on this. So if we had a chance to do it all over again, I think we would engage in a different kind of communication and a two-way dialogue at the very early stages. And we know that once you start, you can't do it all over again. You have to deal with what you've got. But from a standpoint of technology and farmers getting a chance to see this has been extremely successful.
I recognize Congresswoman Woolsey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no new thoughts on this, but I have two major concerns. We listened to the government panel, and they were quite convincing about outreach and inclusion with affected communities. And I think that's because they actually believe that they're doing it and they're doing enough of it. So I think there's a gap. I think there's a gap between their enthusiasm to get on and get going forward and what this panel, I heard, that will be glad for help, but I think the help would be much more effective if you included us in the planning and design and implementation. So that, and I'm going to ask for feedback on how you would do that. The other concern I have, and that's for you, Dr. Herren, when you're feeding and bridging a gap of needing a lot more food for a lot more people, how are we going to put controls on the possibility of maybe too much of a good thing when it comes to better seeds, and what is really a better seed versus a better way of growing? I actually, Mr. Steiner, I represent Marin and Sonoma County, just north of San Francisco. I mean, they have placards everywhere, no GMOs. I mean, believe me, they're worried about this. So I think we have to worry. I mean, there's a concern that we don't take advantage of a hungry nation or hungry nations by, you know, all of a sudden setting up systems where there will no longer be fertile seeds, and et cetera, et cetera. So first, how about you, Ms. Nezera? Yes, on the bridging the gap with the inclusion.
Right. I believe that the administration is making serious efforts. I think there can always be more, but obviously some of my concrete recommendations, I would go back to what I said in my testimony about regular meetings with civil society. As I mentioned, we were included in a meeting 2 weeks ago. It was the first meeting that we had been invited to on this initiative for 6 months. Right. So I think I would emphasize the regularity. And I don't know exactly what that regularity is. I think it depends on how fast the process is moving. I think that the other thing is advocating vis-a-vis the government of Rwanda, for example, for more inclusion of civil society, local civil society, and international civil society. I think that the government of Rwanda, for example, doesn't automatically think of us. They are in charge of their development of agenda, and they want to be running the show. They do include us from time to time, but I think that the government of the United States could advocate for us and the role that we could play more than they are.
And how about Uganda, Ms. Zuma?
In Uganda, we would recommend that government works with, the farmers themselves. They should do this in a more decentralized manner. They should go down to the district, work with the cooperatives, the organizations, the produce organizations that already exist, to provide them, with the information that is needed. Instead of waiting to invite a few people to go down to the center of the country, that is the capital, to kind of provide their input into a plan that has already been developed. And it's important that it's done at a time that is quite convenient to the farmers. Sometimes they hold these meetings when farmers cannot even afford to leave their gardens to go out, for a meeting. And they should work with civil society because they've been doing this for a very long time and they knew how to do it very well.
Thank you. And Dr. Herren?
Thank you for this question. I think we need to realize that more food or more production doesn't mean less hunger or less poverty. Look at the Green Revolution. For all its benefit it has provided to grow more food, we have today more, 1.3 billion people who are hungry, and another 1.5 billion which are malnourished. Obviously, there's a problem with that approach, which we need to now rethink, and we have done so with 400 people for 4 years around the world. And we came up that although breeding is necessary, that we need better seeds, even maybe biotechnology or genetic engineering, the problem really is elsewhere. and we need to deal with in sequence. So first we have to see where are the major constraints, and they are really actually in the farming systems, in growing, in plant health. And so we need to make the best use of what we already have, of the research which has been done in the International Agriculture Research System, funded by the United States with a lot of money. So there's a lot of solutions there already available. Why are they not put in place? And I think that we need to think about genetic engineering or GMOs. All right, where do they really fit? And I think that if you ask yourself this question, you go out and look. I mean, I have 30 years experience on the ground in Africa, so I've seen it. I think the role they play is minimal at this time, because we know how to deal with the most urgent matter. And actually the farmers, women in particular, what they need is information. They want to know, how can I do things differently? On a project which I'm involved, actually, it's amazing how much information people want, they can absorb. But is it there? No. We need to prepare it, to pass it on, and then they can do it. They want to know how we do compost, how can we grow sustainably, how can we do a biological control, things they don't have to pay for, but which can actually increase their income. So all this is available. Now let's put it out there and let's moving. Now, drought tolerance. Again, although there is a lot of drought tolerance in local varieties, actually some of the genes which are being taken out are being taken out of local varieties in Tanzania and then replaced in other varieties. Well, maybe that's good. But again, there are other solutions. We need a better soil, which has organic matter, which absorb the water rather than let it run off. We need to have complex systems where you produce a fertilizer in situ with legumes, with crop rotation. We don't want just maize and more maize, because I think that's first of all not a very good human food, certainly not in Africa, where we have humongous problems with aflatoxins in corn. So again, I think the solutions, we have worked on this so much, and I would wish that the initiative would actually go back and look at this tremendous amount of work here and say, okay, what can we implement right now? Where are there needs for more research? And again, I think GM technology, more research is actually required. How do they fit into the system, into an integrated pest management system? So we don't have those answers yet. So let's research go on and implement what we know already, which doesn't create any issues and long discussions.
Thank you. And I think we've got time to do some quick second round of questions before we wrap up. I just wanted to wrap up with a question with regard to the impact and the outreach to women. And really starting with Ms. Nazar talking about the outreach you've done. We heard comments earlier about the impact that women have in what we're doing in agriculture and in food quality and development. If you could touch on that.
Sure. Absolutely, I agree with everyone who has talked about the vital role of women in agricultural production and also as caretakers of their families. In Africa, as it's already been stated, and certainly in Rwanda, this is the case as well. A lot of the farmers, majority of the farmers are women. The work that CRS does with our partners on the ground always works with groups of women who are in the majority as in farmers groups and in the cooperatives. When in our nutrition activities as well, the majority of the beneficiaries are women. We're working with them on improved nutrition practices, on growing food in their kitchen gardens that are more nutritious for their families. So I would agree with everything that's been said and say that CRS is definitely working with women in agricultural production, and also it hasn't really been discussed today, but savings and internal lending groups, microcredit, are vital for food security as well. And it's important that those kind of programs be folded in. It's not all about agricultural production. It's also, as some of my colleagues said, about nutrition and access to income. Those groups, microcredit groups, are by and large women, 90% women, and the payback rates, as you have all heard already, I'm sure, are very high among women.
Thank you. And Ms. Nasuna.
Of course, women do most of the work on the farms. They produce the food. But unfortunately, they face a lot of challenges. Most of them do not own the land on which they farm. They cannot access credit. And often when there is a training, it's the men that attend. And that's why we are saying that the consultations are very, very important to involve women. Because to involve both men and the women. Because when the men are not involved and we target only the women, then the men are not very supportive. We've seen this in our work, especially like, with the coffee cooperative that I talked about. Women do all the work on the coffee farms. And then, when the money comes in, it's the husband that controls the money, or the brother or the uncle, depending on the male figurehead around. But then when one of our partners came up with an initiative that what they call the Women Coffee Project, and women were being paid more, then the men were more supportive and were giving their women land on which they can farm their own coffee to generate income. So we are saying that when we are doing these consultations to target women who are facing more challenges than their male counterparts, it's very important to involve the men because they'll be supportive of the projects that we support.
Thank you. And really, Dr. Danforth and Mr. Steiner, can you talk about the work that you've done in the outreach to women as well?
Yes, our work is primarily with science and then carrying that into field tests. We of course have women in our organization and involved in the projects and the field tests. We are reliant on our partners to say what their particular countries need, and we work in training scientists, both male scientists and women scientists, because in the long run, and we hope in the very short run, the scientific decisions for developing countries should be made by the scientists in those developing countries. May I make one other comment, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly.
I'd just like to say, listening to all this, human beings have been improving agriculture for 12,000 years. They have been improving agriculture through making better seeds, through irrigation, through working for better land, and that is going on today, and it'll probably go on long after we have gone. And it's just been very, very interesting to hear these discussions. And there's not going to be a single answer, and I think given the challenges in the world today, we want to encourage everything and stop nothing.
Mr. Steiner.
For over a decade, we have had an external advisory council, and two of the most influential members of those councils over time have been women in Africa, but one of which led a on-the-ground NGO doing work similar to what Heifer International does, and another who is a farmer herself. And they have kept our feet to the fire of who we are really working with, and that predominantly is women. The last point I think Dr. Danforth made about needing everything, I think, is really important. As a matter of fact, I disagree with very little about what has been talked about what is needed. The point I think we really need to be conscious of is not thinking about this from the perspective that we need to direct the agricultural system. I believe these farmers, predominantly these women farmers, are far more rational and effective decision makers than they're given credit for. Yes, they absolutely need more information, and extension is an important piece of this. but I believe in getting choices in front of these people. They will make good choices, and that's one of the things that I know that we're personally committed to, and I hope Feed the Future does also.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Just three quick ones. The Millennium Challenge Corporation and the coordination, do you see any evidence that there is an understanding by the 20 targeted countries, particularly those who have compacts, Tanzania being one of them, that they can, again, synergistically really enhance their situation if those two are coordinated? Secondly, what country or countries would each of you add to the 20? What was left off the list that cries out for inclusion? And how well coordinated are the other countries, other donor countries' money, as far as you can tell? Is there evidence that that money, particularly the new money, is being used? We know that some just, rearranged and repackaged, but there is some new money, I'm sure, coming from several of those European and other donors. How well is that being used?
Yeah, maybe I think what's important is to see how you can also work with on a regional base, because already international agricultural research and the regional agricultural research may actually be places where, again, more support is needed to move the whole agenda forward. And also, like ECOWAS was mentioned, but there's also, I think, the Central African arrangement, and also in East Africa, COMESA. So I think there are regional organizations where it may be valuable to look into, because then you sort of avoid the issue of country A or B, but I think you can channel a lot of information and know-how, I think, to the farmers in these places too. So again, I wouldn't just look only at the nations, but maybe also what can be done at the regional level.
Just very quickly for the three questions you asked, in terms of MCC coordination, I haven't really seen it myself so far. In Rwanda, I haven't heard it being talked about as much in relation to Feed the Future. For other countries, I don't have any specific countries that I would say, why was that country not included? I think there is a lack of information about why those particular 20 questions, 20 countries were chosen. I know a number of my colleagues, country representatives, have been asking those questions. In terms of other donor participation and coordination, my feeling is that the European donors are coordinating quite well with the U.S. government, and I can't say more than that, really.
Well, on that second point, we will get, I believe, a very detailed analysis from the administration as to how they were picked, criteria, the who, where, why, the whole thing. Because I think, Mr. Chairman, plural, it's very important we know how this process is being undertaken, and maybe we might have a few ideas that could enhance it, and perhaps you would too. Thank you. Yes, sir. Doctor.
Dr. Danforth.
I was just going to say, from the standpoint of the making sure that the research is done in the United States in these areas, I have been amazed at the amount of information sharing and the amount of cooperation that goes into everything that we've been associated with. It is. We have one in our environmental area where we have a single grant. It has 2 national laboratories, 12 universities, and 15 private corporations, all involved in one big project, and it's going fantastically well. That's what you can do with modern communication.
Thank you. Yes, one more.
Sorry, I forgot to mention, although I don't have any specific suggestions for additional countries that need to be targeted, we do feel it's very important, and I was very glad to hear the testimony from the previous panel, that part of the Feed the Future initiative funding will be also going outside of those 20 target countries. As we've heard, the neglect of agriculture over a number of decades has really affected a lot of countries, and I think it's important that we not just put all of our eggs into those 20 countries. Thank you.
Thank you. And playing cleanup for today's hearing is Chairman Payne. He's going to get the last set of questions.
Thank you very much, and let me once again commend you for this very important hearing. Dr. Danforth, you mentioned about moving forward in some of the countries that haven't had much of a program. Do you feel that the different countries are at different stages, and that some very basic types of things could be done, such as trying to control water during the rainy season, or trying to have some other type of basic irrigation, maybe drip irrigation? What's your feeling on, with the 54 sub-Saharan countries, the difference in the ability or the capability to move forward on this increasing agriculture?
Mr. Chairman, I can't comment on all of those things because I don't have any knowledge and experience. I can comment only on the areas in which I have experience. And I would say this: there is a lot of difference in the African countries and in countries in other continents in both their scientific knowledge, understanding, the kind of organization, the kind of governmental organizations they have to assess safety and to work with organizations that are trying to do biosafety. There's an enormous difference, and I would also say that we work with the countries that we feel we can work with, that want us to work with them. We would never try. We don't have the self-confidence to try and coordinate these different governments. Mm-hmm. We work with those that that want to work with us, and fortunately, more and more seem to be wanting to do so. The biotechnology that we use has been around for 14 years now, and there've been no problems with it, and people are getting more and more confidence. Mm-hmm. Other coordination, I can't really say with any expert knowledge.
Okay, Mrs. Nasuna, we talk about women having an impact. We know that Ms. Margaret Matai the Nobel Peace Prize winner really showed how one person could really make a difference, and I couldn't agree with you more that women really are the ones that are the engine, and I couldn't agree more that I think you have to bring in the men to try to make them at least feel like they're partners to try to get the job done. And I think that hopefully our program will try to stress that as we move forward to the various countries in Africa. I can't, just conclude again by mentioning sometimes, good ideas, and like you mentioned, the enthusiasm of something. How can anyone be against, insect repellent cotton? There was a notion 3 or 4 years ago of something called AFRICOM, where the U.S. said we're going to run in and this is how we're going to do it from now on, as related to the presence of U.S. military in African countries. Now, they didn't really mean they were going to go and have the general in charge and USAID and State Department, everybody go to report to them, but it sounded that way. There's a General Water Rounds, new program, AFRICOM starts next week. So every country rejected except Liberia because they were just looking for anybody to come in if they're going to buy something, some food, it'll help our economy. But it was just, I guess, a more current example of how something that's not introduced, something that's really good. I'm not so sure AFRICOM is as good as you say your GMOs are, but they receive the same kind of rejection, suspicion, why now? They're going to try to militarize our countries where we all have to report to the generals. We had elections to get rid of generals, and now you got AFRICOM. So perception, as you know, is so important. And so I know that as you move forward, I still, I'm still out on, I think that, well, let me say this. I think that the way you're going about it now, perhaps with education, with results, probably is certainly going to be more advantageous than the initial response. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for this very important hearing, and I congratulate you for telling the speaker don't have any votes while I'm having my hearing. I wish I could be that powerful as you are.
I think it was luck. Thanks, all of you on this panel, and Ms. Nazar.
Sorry, I don't want to prolong the hearing, but I was wondering, even though Chairman Payne didn't address the question to me, if I could address the issue of countries at different stages. I'd just like to say that I do really feel that the different African countries especially, but I think all the countries are at different stages and abilities and capabilities for moving forward and showing results from this program. All of them can go forward, but can they all show results? And I think that's what we're looking for. I think some of the things we should be looking at are absorption capacity, the level of priority that the government gives to agriculture, their commitment that has been shown, proven in the past, stability of the country. If the country doesn't have stability, it's really hard to move forward on some of these areas. And then accountability and transparency has come up in this hearing a number of times, especially earlier, so I'd put that forward as well. And I think that the administration has taken into consideration all of these things, and that's why you see the two phases. So I just wanted to appreciate that.
Thanks to all of you for bringing your expertise and your passion here to this issue for our previous government panel that is kicking off this new initiative. And again, we have a very optimistic view of this kicking off, this new vision for development. It's not just about food, it's about security on so many levels. It's not just a U.S. initiative, it certainly is international in scope, and we are very much going to be looking forward to getting the new coordinator in place to get the program up and running and to be sure that we're getting the most leverage and those results that I think will tell a lot in terms of how this new program is really being rolled out. Thank you all very much.